That's good. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back live with Brain Food from the Heartland, Louis B. Free Radio Show. The Young Techies want me to let you know that it will be available podcasts, and since we just learned it goes up on YouTube and all sorts of things out there, but of course, broadcast live now. I am honored to have the authors of Bully Navigator, The Ultimate Parent's Guide to Protecting Your Child from Bullying and Sexual Violence at School. I have Dr. Steve Cohen, attorney Lawrence Altman. I'm honored to have both of you guys. Who wants to introduce themselves first?
Oh, Larry, you want to start? Go ahead.
Larry, go for it.
I'm Larry Altman. I am currently I'm retired from the practice of law. My field before I retired was helping students with disabilities. Including I was my last real job was at the Kansas City, Missouri Public School District, where I was the lead compliance officer for special education. I was also the Title IX coordinator and in charge of preventing bullying and helping students with mental health. Currently, I'm an adjunct professor at Avila University in Kansas City, Missouri. I have taught graduate education students in those topics. In addition, I am teaching and have for like 9 years now, an undergraduate class from the business school, where we talk about diversity, preventing discrimination in the workplace, and basically all of the anti-discrimination laws in the history of the United States, starting with the Constitution. I'm married for over 48 years to my wife, Gail. We have 2 children, 2 grandchildren, and I will tell you, Louis, if I've done anything good in this world, it's because of my wife, Gail.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful to say. So I've got 2 quick questions to ask you. Tell me your love story about how you met Gail.
Okay, number one, it was 1970, January of 1970. We both were attending Washington University in St. Louis, signing up for a class, and I turned around and she was standing behind me. And I said, oh my, and she started talking to me. I says, why is this incredibly beautiful woman talking to a frumpy fat guy like me?
And it was all love after that? Is that what you're gonna?
I chased her and she finally said, all right, what else can I do?
Why law? Why the practice of law for you?
Well, I have an undergraduate degree in engineering physics, but it was at a time of the Vietnam War, and our department was funded significantly by the Defense Department. And there was a question of whether or not I was on a campus that had all sorts of civil unrest, et cetera. And I didn't see a future in it. And so I just said, well, the only other thing I sort of liked was law school. And I ended up there, miserable for the first 25 years. And my wife, who has her degrees in special education about 25, 30 years ago, said, look, I've got a field for you I think you'll fall in love with. And it's called helping students with disabilities. And so I shifted everything and lived along until 11 years ago, lived in St. Louis, did that kind of work. And then she found a job for me across the state in Kansas City, Missouri, helping that school. And so I stayed there for a while and retired. And so, as I said before you, Louis, if not for her, there is no life for me. She's
beautiful. That's beautiful. I know there's more to that love story. Maybe another time we'll talk, get her on to tell it. I'd like to hear her version of the love story.
She's much prettier than I am.
Well, I'd like to hear her version of the love story, though. Dr. Cohen, good morning to you. Tell us about yourself, if you would.
Hi, I'm Steve Cohen, and I have a doctorate in educational and industrial psychology. I have a couple of masters in public administration and healthcare, labor relations, and then a bachelor's degree in social work, of all things. And I am a human resources consultant, and I focus a lot on sexual harassment and Title VII. And I'm married to Helene, and also 48 years. And we have
that, both of you, 48 years. That's great.
Yeah, Larry and I are actually the same age. We met each other about, 9-10 years ago, Larry? Isn't that about right?
That's correct.
And we're the same age. We got married about the same year, obviously to different women. I have three children, My wife and I have 3 children and 4 grandchildren. And
Congratulations.
my wife's a nurse. My dad was a doctor. And so I grew up and kind of worked in healthcare for many, many years, and then did turnaround work, basically fixing broken hospitals. And
Wow.
then, which required some travel and a lot of sacrifice in the family, because those hospitals were losing $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a month, and they have problems on all 3 shifts. You have to be on all 3 shifts to fix the problems. Anyway, I decided that it was time to change, and I started a consulting practice focused on, as I said, HR. And I'm very interested in this subject of bullying, and Title IX is very similar to Title VII. Title IX is the same thing or similar in the schools, where Title VII is in the business setting. At any rate, we had a terribly unfortunate situation. We had a suicide in the family as a result of bullying. And so it became a pretty personal thing to me. And Larry and I got together to write this book, and actually work together to help schools, school administrators follow Title IX and try to really take a serious approach. And that's how this started.
And again, the book is Bully Navigator, The Ultimate Parent's Guide to Protecting Your Child from Bullying and Sexual Violence at School. You know, when I think about bullying today and some of the horror stories that we hear, and again, I don't want to go too far with it, but you know, how, again, regardless of how someone grew up, what they experienced, that it ended. Maybe there were some other things you had to deal with once you were home, but once you were home, you were home. The school harassment didn't continue. You know, now with social media, it just seemed, and we're hearing more about it. And when you say suicide over it, that's how horrific it can be for students. Who wants to tell us a little bit about bullying today?
Well, go ahead, Larry.
What we know, and Louis, you just hit on the head, is that, again, and I write a significant number of articles besides the book, is that research has shown that you're correct, is that the bullying isn't limited just to the actual event, that it's the aftermath of it, the trauma, as we call it, trauma-related PTSD type symptoms. And studies have shown that once a bullying incident takes place, even if you stop the bullying at that point, you're not finished. You now have a student or students that are going to be traumatized, that require the schools to step in and help those students. In the current affairs, again, this is based upon studies by the United States Secret Service, that they've published 2 documents in 2018 and 2019. The 18 publication was in response to the Parkland shooting and the Texas shooting. What they have found is that 80% of the people that commit shootings or acts of violence in schools have been bullied at least once or are bullies. And their advocacy now is, in 2019, it's no tolerance for bullying because of the impact that it has upon school safety. So the most recent materials would come from there. And to illustrate, last year, after there was a shooting in Texas, a young man shot and wounded 3 people. The investigation showed that he did this because he had been bullied. Nobody did anything about it, even though he told them, and he felt he had no choice but to bring a gun to school and shoot somebody. And we still see that too often today.
Right. So the bullying when we were younger really was confined to the school, and you could just go a different route to a different class or to the different classes and avoid certain people. That doesn't happen today. The zone of bullying, Louis, is generally between 3rd grade and 11th grade. And those kids, and it can go all the way past 11th grade into college, and beyond. There's bullying in the workplace, in the professional and non and semi-professional areas as well. But what happens is that these kids are so focused on social media that their life is wrapped up in screen time, and they literally become addicted to the feedback and to the interactivity on that phone, and they can't put it down. They can't get away from it. You know, when I talk to my own grandkids, and they just say, turn it off. You know, we're at the
Yes.
table, turn it off
Oh.
and let's talk. And they look at me like I'm a zombie or something. It's just a very, very difficult thing. Literally, they are addicted to it. Facebook knows it, others know it, and they can't then avoid the criticism, the harassment, the all the negative side of growing up.
And that's, you know, again, that's something that as much as we older folks want to tell them just stop doing it or just don't do it or just put it down, it's a different situation for them. I mean, it's easy to say. It's easy to say. I shouldn't say easy. I am going to say easy to say to somebody who's abusing drugs, just stop doing it, or just don't drink that beer, or just don't go there, or whatever. It's a whole other thing for the kids, and the pressure. Again, it's one thing as an adult, the pressures on these kids with social media today is I don't even think I can imagine the scope of it.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead, Larry.
Go ahead, Larry.
December 7th of last year, the Surgeon General of the United States published a lengthy document about the mental health crisis in our schools. And there is a section that he devotes to the pressure, the impact of social media, the internet, etc. And he confirms, Louis, exactly what you just said. It's right there in what Steve said. Some states, and Missouri was one of those, because and Missouri being one of the most conservative states in the world, in the United States, in 2016, rewrote their anti-bullying school statute to encompass media bullying. And so that has been, and for the state of Missouri to make that step, there had to have been some incredible pressure or a personal event that resulted in them doing that. And I had the honor and privilege to help the Missouri Education Department draft the model anti-bullying policy, including that section. So Steve, go ahead, you can piggyback on that.
Well, as I said, there's so much going on that schools can't ignore it. They can't just check a box and say that they've done things. The incidences are so prevalent that we really believe that the way to handle the issue is through parents and grandparents. The school administrators, there aren't enough of them. There aren't enough counselors to spot the kids that need help. Our society, has been kind of focused on being non-judgmental and giving kind of trophies for participation and that sort of thing. And so our kids are kind of molded into this kind of vulnerability zone. And we actually can spot the kids that are likely to be victims and are likely to respond badly to victims. But, there's so many of them that the schools get overwhelmed. Wouldn't you say that?
Yeah, that's accurate.
Because
And
the
that's going
numbers are
back to
so-
this.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, Larry, go ahead.
Well, that's part of the Surgeon General's report. And he urges that's why community leaders and businesses are going to have to step up and help schools by providing personnel or whatever to help them achieve that type of safety in the schools. And schools are overwhelmed. We know that as a former administrator, even though I was in the legal department, I certainly was aware of that. And we are expecting a lot of schools. And so the Surgeon General's report, which is lengthy but outstanding, and I'm starting to do some summaries of it, he really pinpoints the need for for the community to come together. The best illustration, not the best, but an illustration. My son is in St. Louis. He's he works for Washington University and the School of Medicine. The university helps out some of the local school districts take care of issues because they're overwhelmed, and that's because they're a great community citizen, and that's what's needed to help.
Overwhelmed with the amount of bullying going on, correct?
I'm sorry?
Overwhelmed with the amount, the sheer numbers that the schools are unable, in some cases unwilling to handle them. What would you say?
Well,
I would say, go ahead, Steve.
well, I'd say that the schools, no administrator would ever say, I don't care. They would never say that. And I don't believe that they really don't care. They're overwhelmed with the myriad of things that are put on their plate. The laws and the rules are enormous, voluminous, almost never ending. And so once a school is notified that there's bullying or there's this kind of behavior, and then when you add into it the mental health issues, then additional laws come in, that the schools are responsible for doing so much that they're overloaded. And so when they get notified, if they don't get notified in the proper structured way, then they actually didn't get notified. And that's part of what this book is about, is teaching parents how to access the system. That's why we called it the Bully Navigator, in that when there is an incident, that triggers procedures and protocols and policies that must be followed. And there's timelines and there's requirements for following up that really put the schools in a position that they're not equipped to handle. And that's actually how this whole thing started. Larry was the Title IX coordinator for this large public school district. He called me and said, there's no way that I can actually accommodate this law by myself. Can you help me? And I said, of course, because Title IX is so similar to Title VII, which I deal with every day, every week. There's a sexual harassment issue within one of my client settings. And so I said, well, let's make this a priority. And we developed guidelines and aids for schools to follow Title IX. Well, what we discovered was that with few exceptions, there was very little interest. And it was disappointing to say the least.
Forgive me for interrupting you. With few exceptions, very little interest. And
Yeah,
that freaks me out. Go ahead.
Well, here's what they had. And first of all, Steve shouldn't give me any credit for this. This was his team. Where I was overwhelmed, my team was overwhelmed, is how do we track it? And thanks to Steve's team, and especially his son, they created a software program that allowed my team to then track every case online so that we could fully implement every single time any incident that was reported. And it was set up in such a way, if there was a sexual harassment, bullying, mental health issue, Steve's team developed the software program that immediately put that report into my desk on one of my screens. And thanks to my son in New York, who's a computer wizard, he said, Dad, you need 3 screens and you need a separate email account for the school to create for that. And with that, the IT department did it. That device, or that software program that Steve and his team developed, enabled us to do our job to such a point that the United States government Department of Education recognized us as one of the nation's leader in support. And this is a inner city, quote, poor school district And yet, thanks to Steve and the leadership we had at the time at KCPS, we had this program. We would go out and we would talk about schools. Yes, there's a cost involved. And it was like we were from Mars. Oh, it's too hard. It's this, and the other. And Louis, I will tell you, even today, if schools would implement that software program and put it into their administration policies, that would be a big step in helping schools address all of those areas, including preventing school shootings. Yet they just don't want to do it.
I don't want to do it. Go ahead.
Well, I was just saying that to give you an idea of the sheer volume. So Larry managed the compliance department for a 23,000 kid school district. And you had, Larry, what, 70, 80 cases going on at any one time?
Sure. But because of your software program, I could track it. Because what you established allowed us to do, and I say us, Louis, it wasn't just me, I had a great team. We were able to build in, thanks to Steve's team, timelines that would send us reminders of when something was due on a particular case. And with that, that's where my private law practice came into being. Understanding your timelines and meeting those expectations goes a long way towards compliance. We could not have done that without Steve's help and his team. We also know that since mental health was included in that several year period, because we also got reports of mental health issues, that because the program was created by Steve in such a way that if a student was entered, let's say on March 1st, 2019, and the student had another incident in 2021, they could link each other and say, hey, this is not the first time. That gave us a different look at it. Well, I know for a fact that twice, because of his program in 2 years, a child who had reported they were going to do self-harm, when the second report hit our table, and this is one of our local hospitals helped us review this, said it's time to take really big action. We got personal letters, or the superintendent from the primary care mental health providers, that we may have saved those children's lives twice in 3 years. So I ask all administrators, and I can't remember what the cost was. Steve, was it $5 per student, $3 per student? Whatever it was, let me ask those parents, your children are alive today, and that entire school district, was that worth saving 2 children's lives? What would you pay for that?
Right.
What would you pay? What would you pay for that? But again, when you think about I guess, and it's the law, correct? Again, let's back to title. It's the law that they comply.
Well, it's two laws. You have Title IX that covers specific items. There's another. It's not it's misconceived. It's not an education law. It's Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which is the cousin to the ADA, the American Disabilities Act. That law is not it is not a clear education law. It is an anti-discrimination law. Students who have disabilities are protected under that section. And so the federal law for them is that when they're bullied, when they're sexually harassed, there are additional guidelines that have to be followed for that class of students, that if you don't, you have another problem, and it doesn't need to be sexual harassment. So we have some students, you have 2 laws to look at, and then the overriding law is the Civil Rights Act that applies to schools as well. And then internally, some states have, Missouri, for example, has a Missouri Human Rights Act that puts another layer of compliance onto the schools.
But you can see, Louis, that there's, in some cases, 3 different laws that are applicable. And administrators are overwhelmed by just the daily activities of running their school, let alone all of these extra things. And so, again, I don't think that they have maliciousness or laziness. It's just that they're overwhelmed. And so we developed the software that would help the school, as Larry said, track all the different cases, actually guide the interviews, the investigations, so that it was in compliance with all laws. And what we found out was almost no one was interested. So what we did was we completely retooled the book. We wrote a new book, and we retooled the software And so that was oriented toward parents.
Parents.
And we know that parents and grandparents, for the vast majority of the cases, will do whatever it takes to protect their children and grandchildren. And so when the parents or the grandparents are notified by their child that they're being bullied, they're going to know fairly quickly, even before the school knows in all likelihood. Then the parents actually, the information is in the book, and it's also, they can buy the software, and it's very inexpensive. We're not trying to become Microsoft. This software is $30 per year. So it's $2.50 a month. I mean, anybody can afford it. And then they can trigger the software. The software then, they populate when they trigger the software, they basically provide the basic information that's required by law. And then that information populates a letter that goes to the school administrator. And it says, using the format that's required and providing the information that's required, notifies formally the school that bullying has occurred, and that triggers these laws. Then the letter says, I want a meeting with you. Me, the parents or grandparents, want a meeting with the administrator within 48 hours to decide. I want you to tell me, school administrator, what you're going to do to protect my child and to stop this bullying. Then within the 48 hours, another email goes out to the parents saying, did you get your meeting scheduled? And here's an outline of the things that you should ask for. Some parents wouldn't even know what to ask for during this meeting.
Yeah.
So this software then guides the parents. And once the parents have notified the school in the proper way, and the school has been reminded, these are the rules that you have to follow. And so if that happens and the school follows the rules, then usually everybody's happy. If the school doesn't follow the rules and they've been told what the rules are, then if they ignore it or they underreact to it, then they've wandered into this zone called reckless disregard. And now the parents have an enhanced lawsuit. And so what we have decided to do is put the information and the power in the parents' hands so that they can hold the school accountable to follow the rules and to protect their children. Is that a good way to describe it, Larry?
Yes, I think that's very good. And as I said, Steve and I have shifted the emphasis to help parents. And I certainly don't want anybody out there, school administrators, to believe they're all at fault. Absolutely not. That is not the case. But yes, I understand they're overwhelmed. I've got it. But it can be taken care of, as I said, not just the software. And this is where I thought Kansas City Public Schools, and not just because I got the job to help them, I thought they were very innovative to bring in someone who they thought had some expertise, and lawyers aren't supposed to say that, but had some working knowledge on these laws. And then again, I don't know if I mentioned before, Louis, give my wife credit. She researched and found this job for me across the state and said, guess what, Lair, I found your job and we're moving from St. Louis to Kansas City. Congratulations. That turned to be the most.
You said okay. You said okay.
I said okay.
Right?
Of course I did. That's why I'm married over 48 years. But the bottom line is she's brilliant and she knew what that was about. And so since I've moved to Kansas City, I've never been happier, but I know it can be done. It takes some dedication. I know that's how much work there is, but I also know that if you get a dedicated group of people inside the school and you get assistance from great civil leaders and other civil citizens or corporate citizens, it can be done. If we could do it at Kansas City Public Schools, an inner city school that had very little money, why can't any school district do it?
Why wouldn't any school I guess I will ask, do it.
Well,
Again, it's the
I think the
law.
United States, it's the law, but the United States Secret Service in one of its papers, I think, said it best. It requires leadership and common sense. And what I have found, sadly, because I read cases every day, I have a list, I have a service that puts out school cases every day, and a week doesn't go by where I find a case where a school district got zapped because there was a failure of leadership and a failure to use common sense. I will read these cases and saying, what in God's name were you guys thinking about? Oh, I know, you weren't thinking.
Weren't thinking.
And that's the sad part about it. They hit the nail on the head in 2019 when they said leadership, common sense. It's just not there in enough cases, not everyone.
That's very disconcerting. I mean, again, to find some cases like that, but to think of the lack of leadership, I don't want to get too off topic, but and common sense being used at school administrators, that's pretty horrific.
Well, let
go ahead,
me
Steve.
let me take a little shot at school lawyers for a second. And I thought when we first developed this software that school lawyers would be advocates for us because this software provided tremendous guidance on compliance with Title IX. And what I found was the lawyers for the schools were not interested in prevention. One of them actually told me, he says, we don't get paid unless there's a fight. So we're not interested in prevention. And so I said, oh my gosh, you're saying that a kid has to get raped or a kid has to commit suicide before you do something, before you want something done? And they said, sadly, yes. And so again, they're not all lawyers that are that way. And Larry's certainly one of them. And we have met some terrific lawyers across the country that do want help, that do want to stop this, that see the value in preventing bullying. So again, I don't want to indict all of them, but it's just, that's why we retooled the book and retooled the software, is because our experience is that parents are desperate for information when their kid is at risk, and they will take the steps. And we're seeing that all over the country with, you know, the parents rising up in school boards and that sort of thing. So we want, and parents and grandparents to have the information that they need to get the schools to comply with Title IX and with the 504 and with all these laws and rules, even though it's tough, that kids' lives are at stake. And both bullying and bulliers are both at risk. And so if a kid is being bullied, that could be the impetus for them to pick up a gun and come to school. And so there's a tenet in mental health, and that is that hurting people hurt people. So when you see somebody that's hurting somebody else, you're also looking at a person who's hurting themselves. They're hurting. And so the schools have really wonderful teachers for the most part. They have wonderful counselors for the most part. And so having the information as to who's hurting, who's in trouble, is super valuable. And so that's why we wrote this book. And that's why I put this software together. And we want the word to get out. And then that's why we're so grateful to you, Louis, for your interest in this program and giving us this platform.
I think it's truly important. Bully Navigator, the ultimate parent's guide to protecting your child from bullying and sexual violence at school. Can you talk a little bit about the website?
Sure. It's schoolsmusttakeaction.com. And if anybody is interested, they can go to that website. They could go to, they can email me. And in the book, my email and Larry's email are published, and I'll be glad to tell you what it is. It's stevecohen82 gmail.com. And one of the fabulous services that we've got, and it's detailed in the book, is that let's say that the parents follow the guidelines of the software, buy the software, or if they don't want to buy the software, if they're not that in tune to the computer, all the information is in the book. And let's say they communicate with the principal, they get their meeting, the principal underreacts to the whole thing and blows them off, even though they have complied with the law and told this school administrator. Let's say that the school still underreacts. Larry and I have put together this next step where the parent can literally call Larry and set up a consultation for $99, and that covers about an hour. Where can you talk to an expert on the subject that you need for $100? At any rate, so Larry will provide them with guidance on a one-on-one basis for $100 consult. And then they have that legal background, that legal information to, again, hold the school accountable to follow up and do what they're supposed to do. And then if the school still doesn't do that, then Larry can help them find an attorney and act as an expert witness in their case. Because if the school does what they're supposed to do, then generally, because the laws really are competent and comprehensive, then almost everybody is going to be satisfied. But if they don't do what they're supposed to do after being told what to do, after being told what the law is, then they've wandered into this zone called reckless disregard. And if they've moved into reckless disregard, then the parents have a legitimate lawsuit against that school district. And we're not advocating for lawsuits. We don't want lawsuits. But what we want is kids taken care of. We want these problems to be addressed. And not only do we want to stop the bullying, but we want to follow up with the kids that have been bullied and that have been traumatized, because the PTSD situation is very real. They could be affected for years into the future. What do you think? Does that make sense?
Louis, let me just add one other thing. When
Please.
people call me, I no longer practice law. They're not coming to me for legal advice. I make that very clear.
Okay.
What I am is a consultant. And that's all it is. I do not go to court. I don't give legal advice. In fact, from the very beginning, I remind people, go talk to your lawyer. You want to include your attorney in a discussion with me, I have no problem with that. But I will not go to court. I am not giving them legal advice. What I am sharing with them is my years of experience of what I think needs to be done to advocate for the child. But if it gets beyond that, then I do have some contacts in my area that I can refer them to for further assistance and for the legal work that will need to be done, because I don't do that. And I am not giving any legal advice to anybody when I talk to them, including on this program.
I understand what you're saying. I guess I'm looking at some of the emails that I'm getting. And again, you're certainly not, when you're saying that about bullies, and it's been my experience with some of the people that I saw that bullied when I was young, they're troubled too. It's not forgiving what they're doing. It's just indicating that there needs to be help for them also. Correct? Am I making sense?
That's absolutely correct. Is that when, for example, when we developed our program for Kansas City, Missouri Public Schools, we certainly took steps to help the victim. And we also recognized even then, and this is 2012 to 2016, that because of the outcome and the trauma created with that they needed further assistance. But we then flipped over to the bully side. And what we first of all said, we have a teaching moment here. We would bring them in for individual teaching moments. We also recognized at that stage, and this was being taught to us by Children's Mercy Hospital personnel who were very good at helping us, that there could very well be underlying psychological reasons for their action, and not to forget that, and to suggest that they go and seek assistance for that purpose. And again, the Secret Service has confirmed that in their 2 papers. Also, the Surgeon General says the same thing. You don't just throw the bully or the sexual offender away. You have to look at both children. And because what drove the engine? And what the Secret Service was saying, especially for those that were bullying, is that especially now, they didn't write it at the time of COVID, but we know the COVID situation, racism, those things can drive the engine. And we have to recognize that as educators and also as a society, that we've got 2 groups of children here that really need assistance.
But again, the book, I would highly recommend the book, Bully Navigator, The Ultimate Parent's Guide to Protecting Your Child from Bullying and Sexual Violence at School. Again, it is Attorney Lawrence Altman and Dr. Stephen Cohen's book. We've got links up. They can get it at Amazon, correct?
Yes.
And we've got those links up at louisfreeshow.com and wfmj.com. We talk about a little bit about sexual violence. Again, these are some things that for people my age are just not, don't really understand the gravity of what's going on in schools today. Tell us a little bit about the sexual violence.
Well, we know it exists, and what
Sure.
what drove the engine on this to some degree. And I always hate to get into the politics, but we have to follow the history of this. 2011 and followed by 2014, that administration was aware that their research was indicating is that school violence, sexual harassment itself was exploding in schools. In addition, what they were seeing is that there were too many people not doing anything about it. And so in April of 2014, President Obama received a detailed report from the Department of Education that indicated that major college campuses were ignoring incidents of sexual harassment and sexual violence on campus. And what they seem to indicate, one of the contributing factors may have been, and this is not me, this is what the DOE was saying, is that it seems that star athletes were getting a pass at times when they should not have been. And I remember this day that after that, within 48 hours of that report, and President Obama rarely got angry in public, he came on the air and said, I am tired of this. This ends now. And the next day, a detailed Title IX update was published by the Department of Education. So we saw that, we continue to see it. And I think one of the offenders, and I hate to pick on a school district, but the Chicago Public School Districts a few years ago was called out on this for constant ignoring these types of things, and put on, and now they are subject to review by the Department of Education. I have recently come across as a witness in a case where a student athlete was given a pass 3 times.
Yeah.
And so
Sure.
that's what drives the engine. And you read this and then you go, wait a minute, what's going on here? And so that's where, and the degree of harm that it causes to the victims of these cases, the PTSD, the embarrassment, these are the kinds of things that drive the engines. And this is now 3 consecutive Secretary of Education have said that if we don't make schools safe, we harm the educational environment. We therefore decrease the performance of our students. 3, and think about that. 2 different parties, 3 different education secretaries have agreed that by not resolving this problem, we are creating unsafe school environments, which create lack of educational opportunities for too many students.
Yeah, and I could go off on that when I speak with teachers that are telling me some horror stories and what I've learned about schools in the area and grade point averages and kids being pushed forward with I mean, we've got to do something and do it quickly. When you say that about student athletes, et cetera, and somebody emailed about being protected, certain kids get protected. I mean, that's got to end. I remember a half century ago with student athletes, again, I'm not comparing the things that are going on now, but kind of teachers would look the other way depending on what they would do because they were important for the school athletics. I better just say it like that. But we saw it, and it's got to be so much worse now.
Well, it is. I haven't read any great statistics on it lately, but certainly, as I said in a case that I testified about, I found it astonishing that, yet not surprising, that they allowed a student athlete who had admitted on several occasions of offending the rights of a young lady to continue to participate, and how they helped out on that. They didn't bother to tell the coach.
Oh,
okay. So the coach didn't know. And so what did you think was going to happen when the last event took place? And again, the Secret Service talks about this. If you don't take steps, you enable the perpetrator, who will then continue to escalate, and each escalation is worse and worse and worse. And then where are you? Where are you then? And so, again, this is a government agency that tells us, hey, everybody, wake up to this. And yet here we are 3 years after the second and 4 years after the first, and I'm still reading cases, and I've participated in it. And I'm going, did anybody bother to read this? And the answer is no. Or if they did, they ignored it.
And I think for other students and other kids see this going on, what does it say about our society? That if you are of a certain, I'm going to say class, if you're, at the athletic class or economic class, that people will look the other way with what you do. I mean, I just think the whole message, all the messaging is awful for all of us, US, right?
Well, it is. And there's something called the bystander effect that we talk about in the book. And what that occurs is that, and again, this is not Larry Altman, Steve Cohen analyzing this. This is psychological studies that have come out and said, look, those who watch bullying and observe it, or sexual harassment, can suffer from the same type of after effects, PTSD type symptoms, as those that are actually involved. And so one of the papers that one of the studies showed that, for example, and I wrote a paper about this, at the Parkland shooting situation, is that because of the psychological impact, not only were the victims who were, God forbid, shot or wounded going to suffer, and the ones that were dead, they were done. But every child in that school, because of the bystander effect, was now going to have issues, or could have issues. I won't say they did, that needed to be addressed properly. And so when we have the studies show, and again, clinical studies say, if I observe an event, I am likely to have, or could very likely have, the same traumatic problems as the victim. Steve, you were going to say something. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that there are consequences to the bystander that, as Larry talked about, that they can vicariously feel the same attack that the actual victim felt. But there's another side of it too, Louis, and that is that they feel badly that they didn't step in. I mean, most people have a moral compass, and they know when something is not right. My two boys and now my grandson are in Taekwondo. And one of the tenets of Taekwondo is, if you see somebody being bullied or attacked, you step in. And my kids, I was all right with their stepping in because they're prepared. They're trained to defend themselves and defend other people, but not every kid is. And I'm not sure I want my kid to step in and get between two that are fighting, because then they become a victim themselves. And so the conflict, the internal conflict of, I saw somebody being bullied or harassed and I didn't step in, and so they feel like they have failed. It's a completely different level of guilt and of self, of damage to that bystander. And so we initially put together in the initial software program a way for the kids to actually either anonymously or not anonymously to report bullying, so that every student becomes a set of eyes for the counselors and for the administrators. And again, we were disappointed to find out that, you know, nobody really at the administrative level bought that or wanted that software. But we were very sensitive to bystanders, and we actually even coined a phrase that we wanted bystanders to become upstanders, do something to protect your peers. And they don't have to step into a brawl,
Sure.
but they can step in and say, this isn't right, and we're not going to tolerate it. And we encourage kids to take an emotional stand, if not a physical stand, an emotional stand. And you know, it's an interesting thing, you know, where most of the upstanding took place, Louis, not from necessarily totally separate bystanders, but for the crew. Let's say that student A is the bullier, and he has or she has a crew around them, let's say 5 kids.
Yeah.
It's one of those 5 kids that actually stepped in and stopped it.
Wow.
Not just somebody from, you know, down the hall that stepped in. And so even those that are connected to the bullier know that it's not right. And so we're trying to get bystanders to become upstanders and to establish a standard of what is appropriate and what is not. And this is part of the milieu in the schools, is that in business, it's very Darwinian. Only the strong survive. But a school district should not be Darwinian. It is every student, even if they're weak or they're gay or they're whatever they are, they all have value. They all have value. And so we want to protect all of the students. And so the school district shouldn't be only the strong kids survive. It's every kid is valued, and every kid is protected, and every kid counts. And when there's an incident, then the schools need to step in. They need to stop the bullying, and they need to prevent the ongoing retaliation and that sort of thing. And that's what the law requires.
Again, that's what the law requires. That's it. You know, so the schools have a lot to stand on, yet too
Yes.
often don't.
That's our finding. Not only our finding, but that's everybody. That every study points the same thing out, is that if the schools follow Title IX, follow 504, and all of these state laws and that sort of thing, they're thought through pretty well. They're established and articulated. The protocols and procedures that should follow are there. The schools don't have to invent anything.
Yeah.
They just need to comply with it. And so, and again, our thinking in writing the book and developing the software is that we're going to put that information in the hands of parents and grandparents. And then when the incident occurs, then if the parents or grandparents tell the school, this is what's happening, and then this is what you have to do.
Basically,
I'm
you're on
telling
notice.
you,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Basically,
I'm
you're on
telling you-
notice. I'm telling you,
Yeah.
you've got to follow the law.
Right. And then the school administrator is now on notice, as you
Yeah.
said. And if he or she follows those rules and guidelines, then everybody's generally going to be happy. They're going to do the investigation. They're going to find out what happened. They're going to take the steps. And the way the law is set up now, even a lot of the bias is kind of cranked out of it. For example, and Larry, you can plug in on this. So there's 3 different school administrators or personnel that are involved in it. So there's a Title IX coordinator, and then there's a different person that does the investigation. And then there's a different person that decides what should happen as a result of the investigation. And so, it's like, it's pretty hard to have collusion between three different
I see
people.
what you mean.
Yeah. Did I get that right, Larry?
Larry, do you
You're
wanna,
correct. That's
you
a
wanna weigh in on
change.
that?
Yes.
Go ahead.
No, that's a change from the Under Secretary of Education DeVos. She made that change, and I thought that was a very good change to add a three. When I was doing it, I had to do it all. There was a review process from the superintendent, but now there are 3 people involved in every case. And I just think that's a better way administratively to handle it.
Right. So again, these small school districts may not have all this personnel, so that the Title IX coordinator is also a counselor. And I mean, it can be done even in a small district. And as a matter of fact, on the back of the book, and this book is in some ways an indictment of the school administrator.
Sure
but
is.
on the back of the book, there's a statement from a superintendent that I worked with closely. Her name was Kathy Butler in the Lone Jack School District. Lone Jack is a tiny little school district of less than 1,000 kids. And even in a tiny little school district like Lone Jack, they're able to follow the rules and to protect their students. So don't tell me if it can't be done when and our experience, frankly, with the software was that the smaller school districts were the most interested and the most likely to get the help that they need. It was the larger school districts that said, oh, we can do this. We got this covered. We don't need you. And and I said, well, how come there was a suicide last year if you've got this covered? Oh, well, that was an anomaly. Well, what about the suicide the year before?
Yeah.
Oh, that was an anomaly. What about the rape before? And so it's like, these things scar people and scar families for life. And so it's so important that the schools have the tools that they need. And that's why we developed the book, and that's why we developed the software, and that's why we priced it the way we priced it. We're not interested in making money. There was money, believe me, there was money tied up in the development of these software programs. And I was happy to fund it. And I'd like to see that money come back, but it's not about the money. It's about providing the tools that parents and grandparents need to protect their children. And that's why we're so appreciative of you, Louis, to give the opportunity to tell your audience that this book exists, this software exists, and they can access it for little to no money and have the information that they need. Our experience is that when their kid comes home and says, oh my gosh, this is happening to me, and the parents are desperate for information, well, what do I need to do to protect my kid? And this book and the software provides that in language and in process that will solve the problem, that will address the problem, that will invoke the law.
And again, it's so important that people get this information out to others that may not have someone in school, or maybe your kid knows someone else is being bullied. And I dare say the parents aren't proactive. I'll just say it like that. Somebody's got to bring it attention to the school.
Right. Well, and parents may not even know. I mean, the kids don't tell parents everything, but the parents can notice and will notice
the behavior
when there's a change in their child. I mean, that all of a sudden their grades are tipping, the way they look, the way they act, the way they express themselves. Parents may not know that it's bullying, but they know something's going on, and they'll get into it. And the parents have a network, and have you noticed something about my son? Has your son said anything about my kid to you? I mean, again, this network exists, and then they're desperate. Parents and grandparents are desperate for information as to what will work what do I need to do to get into this so that my child is protected, so that the bad behavior stops, and then the monitoring can begin, because this could take months and months and months to actually heal and get that kid back on track that has been the victim. And then we want the bulliers, we want them to get the help that they need. We don't want, they're not they're the bad guy in the micro, but from a macro point of view, they're still a student, they're still a human being. They themselves have problems that we want to get.
Yeah, there's a reason they're behaving
exactly
that way. I'm not excusing it, but there's a reason they're behaving. Something's going on at home, something somewhere is troubling them. And they're, instead of internalizing it, they're acting out or whatever. And again, you guys are the experts here, not me, but something. So everything, all aspects of it need to be dealt with. And my guess is most people weren't aware, I certainly wasn't, to the breadth of the law of what is required by schools. I think most people thought, very honestly, like I did, well, the school's got an obligation because they're a school system to take care of it, to deal with it, but not that the law is written as it is so precisely.
Right. Well, so here's the problem.
Really so important about what you do. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, here's the problem. So the law is precise. The law does specify what the schools are supposed to do. The problem is that the Department of Education, unfortunately, has no teeth. The Department of Labor can fine and take very serious steps against employers who do not provide a safe environment from the point of view of sexual harassment or violence.
Yeah.
The Department of Labor has plenty of teeth to hold businesses accountable to provide the safe environment. Unfortunately, the Department of Education doesn't. The only teeth that they have, the only recompense or recourse that they have is to defund the school. And that's so draconian, that's so severe that they almost never do that. And so administrators know that they're just going to get a slap on the wrist and they'll move on and blah, blah, blah. But the courts have plenty of teeth. And of course, the schools know that. So that's why this Bully Navigator and the Safe Students is so important, is that if the parents tell the schools what they're supposed to do, and then the schools don't do it, then there's a lawsuit potential, and the courts have the teeth. The Department of Education doesn't have the teeth, and the schools administrators and the lawyers know that. And so it's embarrassing to, have a case brought by the Department of Education. Surely no administrator really wants to, endure all that government involvement. But in the end, there's really not much the Department of Education can do, which is, of course, different than the Department of Labor can do. The Department of Labor, as I said, can do a lot. And businesses know that, and businesses don't monkey around with sexual harassment. They have a zero tolerance policy.
They know,
they know that they can be fined. That it's a serious matter, and they know it. Unfortunately, it's not that serious a matter from the Department of Education point of view. Larry, is that fair to say? Am I overstating it?
I think the Department of Education is very serious about it, but but as Steve said, they're not going to pull the plug of school funding because of the detriment that will cause. However, where they do create something for schools is that they can get involved and put the schools under an agreement where they are going to supervise the school in this area, and that can be unpleasant. So there is that to go with it. They don't do it as all that often, but it's certainly there. But they're not going to pull funding from schools. They just aren't going to do that. And I think they're right about that. Why should everybody suffer because of some incompetency at the top? The kids aren't asking for that. So I got that part.
But again, unless it gets to the point of a lawsuit, they can be inactive correct? There's nothing really forcing them. Is that
Well, the
fair?
Office
You
of Civil
tell me.
Rights, for example, in one school district, what they will do, because there was a school-wide issue of not complying with Title IX, they basically got into the matter where the school was ordered to report several times a year what they were doing. Every case that was brought to their attention had to be reported to the Office of Civil Rights. And so you had their federal involvement. I used to, and that is something to be avoided, because I don't want federal agents crawling over the building. And I would call them the red ants. Once you get them in, how do you get them out? So it's unpleasant. So, but it doesn't often happen to that detail, but you still read cases where they have not followed the protocols. Then what happens is an agreement is reached between the school district and the Office of Civil Rights. It's called a resolution agreement. But part of that agreement now requires them to make periodic reports for, say, 3 to 5 years to the Office of Civil Rights.
So they've got
and that's the agency that watches the schools. That's another layer of administration that schools could use elsewhere to help teach children. So that creates the problem. So it's to be avoided.
when possible. Again, the book, Bully Navigator, The Ultimate Parent's Guide to Protecting Your Child from Bullying and Sexual Violence at School, attorney Lawrence Altman and Dr. Steve Cohen. I know you didn't want me to say attorney, but people need to know about your
That's
background.
okay. As long as they understand I'm not their lawyer.
You're not their lawyer
practicing
at this point.
Right.
And I get that. This is so, again, you two are so driven to get this important information out. It almost seems like you two against the world.
Oh no, there's other great attorneys in the community and around the country that do what I used to do. And in-house attorneys work very hard to get protection for the children. Yes, there are those groups of attorneys that represent the school districts outside of the school. I've got that, but there are many dedicated lawyers. The ones that I refer cases to are very dedicated.
Sure.
Where we feel who feels they're against the world are the parents, because what if the parents can't afford that legal representation? It's expensive. And so they're the ones that are against the world. And I think Steve and I'll add Mrs. Altman and I are the same. What can we do? Here's what I always say. What can I do to help the child? That's my mission. That's Steve's mission. And that's Gail Altman's mission as well.
And that's beautiful. And that's beautiful. And Stephen, again, your mission, when you talked about earlier and what, you personally have experienced, again, to take this to this level, I think is absolutely important. Again, I don't think any of us can imagine what it would be like wouldn't want to imagine what it would be like to be a parent today and just not know where to get help, what to do, or to tell your kid just to keep their head down and get through it. It would be awful.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So again, the website, Steve, tell us again.
It's schoolsmusttakeaction.com or www.bullynavigator.com. And my email, if anybody wants to follow up, is stevecohen82@gmail.com. And we so welcome anybody's review of the book and review of the software. And what we've discovered is that 9 million people on Facebook have kids, fit this profile, have kids between 3rd grade and 11th grade. And we'd sure like to have those folks know that their kids, should they find themselves in this position, will know what to do and will be able to protect their kids. So we're just getting started. The book came out just a couple of months ago. We actually wrote the original book back in 2020, and then retooled it when we finally realized that we weren't getting anywhere with our approach, focusing on school administrators, and we redid everything
to the people.
Yeah, to focus on parents and grandparents.
Take it to the people, the parents and grandparents, which is absolutely beautiful. We've got links up at louisfreeshow.com and wfmj.com. I want to thank you both Larry Altman and Steve Cohen for doing the gig with me. And let's do it again down the road soon and update and let us know what's going on. I just find your work heroic and so
Thank you.
important for kids. And again, to think about being a parent today, I don't have a child in school. I don't have grandkids in school. And to think about how helpless one might feel without this information, and where do you do and where do you go and how do you get educated? Where do you start? I think what you're doing, I don't think I know what you're doing is so vitally important and wonderful. Thank you.
Well,
Both.
God
Thank
bless
you,
you
sir.
for what for all you're doing. Thank you so much.
I'm
Yes.
interested. Let's do it again. Vitally
Absolutely.
important, folks. Bully Navigator, vitally important information. Again, we've got the link